What sounds like pseudoscience but actually isn't? Story 1. The effect on your dopamine receptors from fantasizing/imagining things. I forget the exact term. As it turns out, you can achieve a pretty high dopamine response from fantasizing/imagining/talking about goals, which can provide your brain with enough happy chemicals to actually hinder your drive to go and achieve those things for real. This sounds like bullshit, but it's true. Story 2. Ever heard of epigenetics? It sounds like pseudoscience with its talk of genes being turned on and off by environmental factors, but it's a legit field of study. It's all about how lifestyle and environment can influence gene expression without altering the DNA sequence itself. Story 3. You absorb more nutrients from cooked eggs than you do from raw eggs. People don't believe it because cooking eggs actually does reduce the amount of nutrients. But cooking them changes the protein structures and makes it easier for your body to actually absorb them. It's called protein denaturation, and it increases the bioavailability of the proteins. Bioavailability describes what is actually available for your body to digest and absorb. More nutrients doesn't necessarily mean more bioavailability, and less nutrients doesn't necessarily mean less bioavailability. Story 4. The bacteria in your intestine exist to digest the foods you usually eat. If you stop eating those foods, the bacteria will die, so they send a message to your brain causing you to crave those foods. If you're trying to give up French fries, for example, it will take about 4 weeks to kill all the bacteria accustomed to digesting that food, and you will continue to crave it while they live. It also may be possible to lose weight by getting a fecal transplant from a thin person. The only problem is, it is also possible to get a mental illness, potentially from that same person, so they should be screened carefully. Story 5. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR. Essentially, you look at a moving light or object in the therapy room as you process painful memories, as in PTSD and related trauma disorders. It's very effective for most people and typically works faster than traditional therapeutic models. Sometimes the relief is apparent even after one session. It's broadly applied to PTSD, anxiety disorders, phobia, dissociative disorders. EMDR is indicated for a wide variety of life challenges. Privately, I call it the little miracle. There are times when it appears to be almost mystical, but then the human mind is vast and endless, and we know very little about it. Story 6. B.F. Skinner's air crib. In psychology, B.F. Skinner is considered the father of behaviorism, and he wrote a sci-fi book called Walden 2, which featured some of this. What he's less known for today, but was well known for back in his day, was his air crib for babies. It was basically a ventilated and climate-controlled box enclosed by plexiglass. It was padded but similar to a doctor's chair with paper that rolls out and replaced with new paper. In this case, it was rolled out for hygiene, messes, etc. And parents who bought and used one for their kids loved it because their kids were content and comfortable. But the masses and media thought it was crazy. They claimed Skinner was nuts, and the air crib was basically a terrarium for children. Skinner invented it because his research determined that the main reason babies become upset and cry, besides being hungry, is that they are uncomfortably too warm or too cold. His research showed that if a baby has a perfectly controlled environment and is comfortable, it won't keep waking up at night crying, and parents will get more sleep. Plus, since you didn't need blankets and sheets, nor did the baby need all sorts of clothing to wear, parents didn't have to constantly do laundry. Again, critics ridiculed the air crib, claiming that it was a horrible Skinner box, which was a totally different thing he used for experiments. They even invented stories about babies dying or growing up crazy, and that Skinner's own daughter ended up committing suicide as a result of her being raised in an air crib, which is funny because Skinner's daughter would later claim that she was very healthy and alive and had no horrible memories of the air crib. Ultimately, the thing that's interesting about the air crib is that it's really just a technological upgrade from the very thing most Finns put their babies in. When a woman in Finland gives birth, they are literally handed a folded-up cardboard box, and when they get home, they unfold it, put a little padding at the bottom, and that's it. No fancy, elaborate crib. A cardboard box. The Finns have one of the lowest infant mortality rates on the planet, 2.1 per 1,000 born. By comparison, the United States, Slovakia, United Arab Emirates, and Bosnia have nearly the exact same rate, around 5 to 5.1. You can't really buy an air crib anymore, because no company is willing to associate itself with the constant criticism of the device, regardless of how successful it was to numerous couples in the 1940s and 50s, but you can build one yourself. Story 7. Visualizing and mirror neurons. Research has showed that visualizing is actually incredibly powerful. It activates both motor neurons and mirror neurons. Watching someone do a squat with good form and visualizing yourself executing that same motion with good form are almost the same to your brain as physically doing it. So if you're working out, learning a dance, etc., watch videos of other people doing it. Close your eyes and visualize yourself doing it, moving through the motion, and then when you go to do it, it will be easier. Story 8. Mycelium. You're telling me the roots of mushrooms act as a big message delivery system that not only allows information to be sent large distances across a single specimen, but can also be used by connected trees to communicate with each other and swap nutrients? This is an oversimplification, and mycelium absolutely does not think, isn't sentient like humans do. However, I'm not exaggerating just how implausible it all sounds. There are some amazing mushroom documentaries out there, and it still baffles me. Story 9, the double slit experiment, where one particle seemingly is in two places at the same time. One of the most profound experiments in all history, and an experiment that is pretty easily done and has been repeated many, many times because it is unbelievable. If it doesn't disturb you on some level, you are probably not understanding it. Story 10, people getting PhDs to study fossilized feces, aka coprolites. First time I heard about it, I thought it was a joke. After all, isn't a fossil organic material that's been replaced by minerals, so what good will it do to study the size and shape of stone turds? Nope, it's an actual respected field of physical anthropology that's contributed a great deal of knowledge to prehistory. Story 11. Not exactly what the thread is asking about, but a story that just happened. My wife and I were watching some Netflix true crime show. Some guy is on the run from the police, and the police find a bag he stashed. All the electronics were wrapped in tin foil. We laugh at it like, haha, tinfoil conspiracy nut. My wife asks, would that even do anything? I'm like, no, well, I guess it might make a Faraday cage to block signals, but there's no way it does anything, does it? I grab some tin foil, wrap my phone up, and yup, her phone calls were no longer coming through. So that's my answer. Wrapping your electronics in tin foil sounds like pseudoscience, but it does stop them from wireless connections. Story 12. That cosmic rays, neutrinos, are responsible for a lot of random computer errors. The smaller components are, and the less electricity the need, makes them more susceptible to interference. They carry very little electrical charge, but enough to flip zeros to ones, the wrong flip, and oops, not working correctly, temporarily. This is why turning things off and on again fixes so many issues. Story 13. I'm no expert, but this is based on my first-hand experience. Taking vitamin D supplements makes me feel significantly less depressed, like I have the potential to be normal if I've consistently taken it. And if I haven't, I will definitely be depressed, even if everything else is going great. Now, vitamins aren't exactly pseudoscience. They are, in fact, actual science. But I had a hard time taking certain people seriously about them. But damned if it doesn't make a demonstrative difference in my life. Story 14. Most of psychology and neurology sound like absolute bullshit once you read into it first. And then there's just this disgusting mountain of evidence in your face. Like, just look at ADHD. For an ADHD person, the reason they didn't do something can quite literally be, my brain didn't let me do it. And it's not BS. Like, it's a thing called executive dysfunction, which is the brain not know what or how to do something or start or a lot of other things and then just doesn't. The outside observer, it looks like laziness and that they're just slacking off, scrolling their phone or watching stuff. But inside is an entire monologue of said person screaming at themselves to just do the thing, but they can't. It's also not just for important or menial tasks. They'll procrastinate on things they want to do, like playing a video game or reading a good book. It can often feel like locked-in syndrome, a condition where you're locked inside your own body as an observer. Story 15. The perception of pain is actually modulated by your thoughts and feelings. You can use willpower to make pain less, or more commonly IRL. You can distract someone to decrease their perception of pain. I always heard the concept in action fantasy stories, where a stoic monk-type character was mind over mattering the pain away, and though it was just on the same tier as chakras. Story 16. Using clove oil to treat mouth pain, which sounds like essential oil BS, right? But it works. About 13 years ago, I had my wisdom teeth extracted and wound up with dry socket in my 2 lower incisions. It was hell. Nothing worked. Went back to the dentist and he packed the incisions with clove oil-soaked gauze. I had zero belief it would help, but it really did. Since then, I've heard of it used to treat all sorts of oral pain like canker sores, swollen spots, etc. Story 17. You get more nutrients from food the more you enjoy said food. It sounds like bunk, but they did a study where 2 women were tasked with eating, in particular, food from their home country, food from the other woman's home country, and they're home food but blended into a paste. Despite both meals having the same nutrition content, IIRC, the women got more nutrients from their home country's food and less from the foreign food, and even less from the paste. Story 18. Ketamine therapy. It's usually put in the same category as ayahuasca or other spiritually enhancing. But ketamine and other psychedelic substances actually increase neuroplasticity in your brain and allow you to kind of overwrite certain habits. It's insanely helpful in cases of anhedonia, PTSD, and addictions therapy. When paired with a session of psychotherapy, it can really make an impact. I really have hope for the future of mental illness healthcare. As Story 19, there is an area of your brain that maps pain called the somatosensory cortex, and you would think that the larger organs would take up the most space on the cortex, but it's often the exact opposite. Your hands and your lips take up more bandwidth in your brain than other body parts that are significantly larger. The map of your body parts is mostly in order, like your hand is next to your wrist, which is next to your arm, but the mapping also seems kind of random. For example, your genitals are mapped right next to your toes. Story 20. Apparently, if you bombard a fractured bone with certain kinds of electromagnetic and/or ultrasonic energy, it will heal faster and better than if you hadn't. Bone stimulators have been in common use for a couple decades now and work just by being near the fracture site while powered on. Sounded like a bullshit medical scam to me, but I had two friends who got essentially the same wrist injury and the one who was prescribed bone stimulator therapy and could actually afford the rental on the device, Murica, healed up much faster. Story 21. Seeing with your tongue is possible by wearing a special helmet with a camera and an electric plate on your tongue that transmits low-voltage signals via the plate. The brain will interpret that information through the visual cortex. The technique has also been used to help people with a malfunctioning cerebellum by helping them restore their balance. Story 22. Exercise and macronutrient balance, that is carb, protein, fat, doesn't have that strong of a connection to weight gain or loss. The main factor in weight loss is how much calories you eat versus how much you expend, and how much you expend doesn't nearly increase or decrease as much with exercise compared to eating one less thing in your day-to-day life, because there are a ton of little levers that your body automatically turns on and off to control for expenditure. This is why powerlifters can work out for every waking moment in their life and still store energy, and why people with a lot of stored energy can basically starve themselves for an extensive period of time without dying. It sounds weird, but all you need to do to burn stored energy is eat slightly less. That sounds silly given the amount of information on weight loss that is out there, but the science keeps telling us that eating less is the only reliable method. It'll feel like you're starving yourself, and you basically are, and it's very, very hard. But eat less is the gold standard, so to speak. Everything else is just a roundabout way to get to that point. Story 23. Off-the-shelf medicines for colds and fever prolong the sickness. If you take ibuprofen to break a simple fever, you're essentially suppressing your own immune system. Medicines like Dayquil or Mucinex suppress coughs, and while giving you an expectorant. Expectorant can cause you to develop more mucus in the lungs and worsen coughs with little benefit. Essentially, you're making your problems worse by taking something advertised to make you feel better. Story 24, I would add clinical hypnosis to this list. As a pediatrician myself, I frequently see kids referred to me with various forms of chronic pain. Chronic abdominal pain being the most common. There's a battery of tests and questions that are necessary to rule out more serious conditions like celiac disease, cancer, etc., or even just treatable ones like constipation. But once we've ruled out those, clinical hypnosis has an impressive part to play. Evidence exists to show that it can considerably reduce pain in a large number of patients. Apparently, it has to do with the diverted attention and the resulting subjective difference between pain that happens to you and pain that you feel that you are more in control of. The latter is more manageable and causes less suffering at the end of the day. Ever the skeptic, I learned some techniques and tested it with my patients. In one particularly memorable case with this one kid who had had daily pain for the previous 7 years. The pain slowly grew milder and eventually disappeared completely within the span of a month. 6 months later, still no pain. Story 25. Sensory science. So everything we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell are all just signals to our brains, and our brain then translates that in a billionth of a nanosecond to then tell our body what we're experiencing. We have ways of altering that signal, drunk, stoned, high, deprivation, hypnotizing, breathing gases, to give us a new sensation, often dulling or heightening, and even at times removing a signal. When we do that, we may have hallucinations, which is the ocular signals transmitting signals that the brain says is there but isn't, or being hypnotized to not taste vegetables to overcome a distaste for plant-like food. Then we have the fun ones. Helium, it alters your vocal cords, and you hear yourself in a higher pitch, even though naturally we try to adjust to our natural range. Morphine removes all sense of touch, pain, and completely relaxes all of the muscles, leaving the user in a blissful sleep state for recovery. Now, the kinkiest one, deprivation, you take away the ability to move and the sense of sought and leave it all to touch, heating, and taste that sends some people into a higher euphoria state, while sometimes it can also lead the mind into a state of shock, leaving the person with nightmares and PTSD. So the solid question is, are we just a brain in a naturally growing life support system that is living in a colorless world, or are we truly alive and experiencing this world firsthand in all its splendor and color? Story 26. Skin-to-skin benefits for mom and baby. I kind of rolled my eyes at it. Of course, cuddling is nice, right? But when my preemie twins were in the NICU and hooked up to every possible monitor, you could just watch their vital signs normalize every time I put a baby on my chest. We did hours and hours every day of skin-to-skin, and the nurses swore it's why my babies got healthy, gained weight, and were able to leave so quickly. When you dig into it, the science does back it up, which is why the U.S. parental leave policies are incredibly inhumane and financially make no sense in the big scheme of things. Having both parents off was how we were able to do so much skin-to-skin time. Most parents don't get that luxury. Story 27. Sherlock's Mind Palace is a real and legit thing, and has the potential to increase an individual's memory, observation, and retention skills exponentially with fairly minimal practice and exercise. For example, myself, who has spent less than 72 hours actively practicing, can memorize just short of 40 numbers in a minute using some seriously simple techniques. These random numbers also persist until I overwrite them, meaning that until I decide to forget them, they remain in my memory in a way I can recall them with near 100% retention. After about 3 months with no rehearsal is when retention drops, but not by much. These skills can also apply to things that seem superhuman, like memorizing names and faces, words and definitions, doing seemingly impossibly rapid mental calculations on problems that are difficult to do even with a calculator, or even remembering every event every day for the rest of your life. Far more advanced, but apparently this is possible, and I believe it. I've seen some less crazy examples, like an individual memorizing the entire New Testament word for word. He demonstrated this by recalling passages forwards, backwards, and from the middle, using the journey method. This is a lot less crazy than it sounds. Memorizing poetry word for word in 5 minutes or less using the same method. To me, it's fascinating. If anyone is interested, you can head to Art Off Memory forums, just Google it, or read Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer. The Victorious Mind by Anthony Metivier is also a great resource, as well as one of Tony Buzan's memory books. All are good resources. Story 28. Muscle memory. And I don't mean this in the sense of memorizing patterns of movement such as learning how to kick a footy or doing a backhand, swinging a golf club, etc. There's an idea which sounds like complete bro science. It was told to me by a really, for lack of better word, sorry I couldn't think of a more sympathetic word. They honestly taught me some valuable info, me being a complete nerd having no clue what to do at the gym. Anyway, I think it was the phrasing which made me think it was bro science. I'd say there's definitely a more specific scientific term for it. Anyway, the idea is that when you build a lot of muscle over time, then lose it, you get back to the gym and rebuild it extremely quickly. Like in a fraction of the time it took you to build initially, the whole thing just sounded like bro science to me. However, I can confirm it's true because it happened to me. I'm guessing it's got something to do with your body remembering the sequences of proteins and amino acids once you build the muscle. And that's one of the biggest hurdles in building muscle. Once you've built it, your body remembers how to build it back. If for some reason you get extremely lazy and stop going to the gym for 2 years like I did, whoops. And of course, I'm not that smart either because I don't know the exact name of this phenomenon. If anyone can be bothered finding it on Google for me, that would be fantastic. Or maybe it really is called muscle memory and I'm being a prejudiced cunt. Who knows? Story 29. Something people consider pseudoscience but isn't. The 100th monkey effect. The 100th monkey effect refers to the phenomenon where a new behavior or idea spreads rapidly through a group once a critical mass of individuals, around 100, has adopted it. The term comes from a 1950s study on Japanese macaques, where a group of monkeys learned to wash sweet potatoes before eating them. As more monkeys learned this behavior, it suddenly spread to other macaque populations on neighboring islands without direct contact. While the original study has been criticized for methodological flaws and lack of concrete evidence, the concept of the 100th monkey effect has been misunderstood as pseudoscience. In reality, it highlights the power of social learning, cultural transmission, and critical mass in shaping behavior and ideas. So, while the original story might be exaggerated or misinterpreted, the underlying principles of the 100th monkey effect have merit and continue to inspire research in social psychology and behavioral science. Story 30. The whole thing with dissociative identity disorder, or other lesser-related disorders, that fusing back into one person is seen as less and less important in psychiatry as time goes on, and just living as multiple people in one body is seen as valid if the system chooses so. It's hella fascinating that we're capable of conjuring up actual fully blown people inside our brains, and symptoms like headache, nausea, and intense brain activity when switching seems to suggest there's functionally no difference to them from the original personality you've had from birth. And it's a powerful coping mechanism too. Story 31. Most autoimmune diseases can be controlled/prevented/eliminated through diet. The autoimmune epidemic in America is mostly because of our food system. Half the women I know have thyroid issues. Everyone has IBS or poor digestive gut health. Everyone has allergies. This isn't what life was like when I was a kid. I used to think, yeah, okay, until I quit dairy altogether. And my Seaver mountain cedar allergy 95% went away. I even vacationed in mountain cedar heartland, shook a cedar, and watched the pollen cloud come off, and I was fine. In my case, taking in large amounts of whey protein for bodybuilding seemed to be the issue. I went vegan for 6 years with incredible results to health and fitness inflammation. I eventually reincorporated meat but avoid dairy as much as possible. In my wife's case, Hashimoto's disease, her immune system attacking her thyroid, was brought down to levels that wouldn't indicate disease by working with a dietitian and identifying her triggers. Corn was a huge one. It's unbelievable that we eat corn that produces its own pesticide through gene splicing. Poor gut health is the #1 factor of your overall health, and your diet is an enormous link to all autoimmune diseases. Story 32. Remember being told your brain stops developing after childhood? Turns out that's totally wrong. Your brain keeps changing and adapting throughout your life. It's called neuroplasticity, and it's why you can learn new skills at any age or recover from brain injuries. Pretty cool that our brains are way more flexible than we thought. Story 33. Quantum mechanics, and in particular quantum field theory. A particle can be described as a creation operator that, at a given point in space-time, acts on the vacuum state to excite it with given energy, momentum, and spin. It shares properties of classical particles as well as classical waves. Measurement results can only be predicated probabilistically. Sounds like made-up black magic for some sci-fi story, but it actually predicts consistent results in experiments. But I am not surprised that the MCU slaps the word quantum on anything with the feature "can explain it." So lazy to come up with my own pseudo-explanation. Story 34. I'm late to the game, but I've got an incredibly interesting one. There's something called a flow state, and it is 100% real, verified, and recreatable. A flow state is something we have all experienced in our lives accidentally. It's that perfect level of attention where you just dive into what you are working on. Your attention and focus are dialed in to the point that the rest of the world just fades out. Flow state even produces different brain activity than normal thinking. This is excellent for cultivating creativity and accomplishment. Story 35. The legitimate medically proven treatment for many cases of vertigo is teaching patients how to realign the crystals in their body. In your ear, you have calcium carbonate crystals called otoconia or canaliths and little hairs. And the way those two things interact is a huge part of how you register balance and orientation. Dislodging those crystals through some sort of injury, infection, etc., can often lead to disruptions in a person's sense of balance. One of the most common medical treatments for people experiencing this problem is a set of maneuvers that's designed to help reposition those crystals called the Epley maneuver. They are actually fairly simple and something anyone can just do at home in a couple minutes. Story 36. This is going to sound stupid and maybe doesn't fit, but aphantasia sounds fake to me because I don't suffer from it. I have an incredibly vivid imagination and some wild, intrusive thoughts, but I literally can't imagine what it's like to not be able to imagine things. Every time I try to think about it, all I can see is people not being able to live normal lives because they don't have a way to picture stuff in their head. Face blindness confuses me too. Sorry if these don't fit. Edit. When I say it sounds fake, that's all I mean. I don't mean I really think it's fake or anything, just that it doesn't compute in my head, which I guess is the point. Story 37. The architectural and design aspects of feng shui. It's more psychology and practicality than anything, bundled up in metaphors such as qi or energy. Your dining table has too much qi. That just means it's in an annoying path that people walk through. Shout out to Dear Modern for changing my mind. Story 38, induction stoves. They heat the pan, not the stove. They're as reactive as gas, but because they're so focused, much more efficient and less heat escapes. The surface of the stove never gets hotter than the food, so you can lift a pot of pasta that just boiled over and wipe the heating element with a wet rag 1 second later and be fine. They're totally safe if you turn an element on by accident because there's nothing on top to get hot. The first time I heard someone explaining induction, they weren't all that clear and were just telling me it was a special stove that was basically perfect, and I was convinced they were BSing me. Then they said something about how it only works if your pans are magnetic, and it clicked. Story 39, neurodiversity, and the concept that someone can have a totally different was of perception and sensory processing that makes their world vastly different. Thank God for social media, cause I really doubt people would believe that humans who look no different externally would believe someone had a different brain. Even now, it's wild people not believing I'm autistic and how it is substantially disabling and reduces my functioning. Story 40. Electroconvulsive therapy, also called ECT, is a treatment for depression in which electrical currents are run through the brain to induce short seizures on sedated patients. One would think that it is some old-school Quakery, but it is in fact one of the most effective treatments for depression. However, due to the extreme nature of the procedure and the severe side effects, pain, significant memory loss, it is typically reserved for extreme depression that is refractory to other modalities of treatment. Story 41. In comic Global Frequency, there is a character who calls himself Magician, but he means an existing field of psychological research into how exploiting psychological loopholes in human perception allows us to trick people into thinking one has done something impossible. To make it funnier, a person who calls him a fake scientist is a parapsychologist, which is a pseudoscience. Story 42. Gravitational waves that are waves in space and time. And yes, you can actually measure them for a few years now and even do astronomy with it. They do measure changes in distance that are less than atom core diameter by squeezing the laser light to make the photos smaller. You can see black holes collide with them and found out that there are intermediate-sized black holes that should not exit based on our current model of the universe. Story 43. The consistency of the human brain is similar to Jell-O. So when you shake your head around and it feels funky, that's because your jelly brain is smacking around in there. Bonus fact, baby skulls are soft when they're first born, which makes them very vulnerable to brain damage if they are rocked around a lot. Shaken baby syndrome is basically damage from the jelly brain not being protected by a jelly skull. Story 44, the placebo and nocebo effects. Although the exact mechanisms behind them are still not fully understood, the placebo and nocebo effects are fascinating and, on face value, seem like nonsense. In the case of the placebo, a substance or treatment with no active ingredients can still lead to the perception of real improvements, such as reduced pain or alleviated symptoms, possibly simply because the person believes it will help them. Conversely, the nocebo occurs when negative expectations cause harmful or unpleasant effects, like increased pain or nausea, again simply because the person believes it will harm them. Story 45. Everyone has a scotoma, blind spot, near the center of their vision, where the optic nerve passes through the retina, but our brains fill in the gap with what they think should be there. If you want to test this, draw 2 small dots on a sticky note about 2 inches apart. Close your left eye, and using your right eye, look at the left dot and move the paper slowly towards you. There should be a spot within a foot of your face that the right dot disappears. This happens because our eye can't see the outside dot when it enters the area of the scotoma, and our brain assumes that spot matches the rest of the sticky note that it can see. You reverse it for the other eye, left eye, right dot. Story 46. There are many concepts that might sound like pseudoscience at first, but have solid scientific backing. For example, quantum mechanics, with its talk of particles being in multiple places at once, sounds wild but is well established. Another is the placebo effect, where the mind influences the body's health, which seems improbable but is backed by substantial evidence. These ideas challenge our understanding, making them seem unreal, but they're grounded in science. Story 47. Unfortunately, climate science. We are at 1.5 degrees above the average temperature compared to pre-industrial standard, and it's already all kinds of catastrophes. At 4 degrees, humanity will pretty much be extinct, which will happen before we reach the year 2100. That's because it's the average rise of temperature. In reality, we have to consider that the seas won't heat up much, but enough to kill billions of sea life, and cities will heat up way more. So those 4 degrees are heating up cities 10, 20 degrees. crops will die, and the following biodiversity crisis will kill billions of animals. The whole ecosystem will collapse as it is right now. That's like shit you see in a horror or disaster movie. Don't look up. Story 48. Women usually have their index finger and ring finger at equal length, and men usually have a longer ring finger than index finger. However, lesbians are more likely to have a longer ring finger, and gay men are more likely to have the index and ring finger at equal length. Story 49. Quartz, the rock, can transmit mechanical vibration as electrical current. Quartz is silicon dioxide, one silicon atom and two oxygen atoms. When these atoms exist as the molecule of quartz, silicon behaves positively, and the two oxygen atoms behave negatively, like the positive and negative of a magnet. If you make silicon dioxide vibrate, these positive and negative atoms wiggle back and forth and generate an electrical current. It is very similar to how an electromagnet works. A real-world example of this being used in technology is in acoustic electric guitar pickups. A strip of silicon dioxide is placed somewhere on the guitar, and it has two wires coming out of it that eventually lead to a guitar amp or speaker system. When the guitar string is plucked, the vibration wiggles all of the molecules of the strip, and an electrical current is sent through the wires to a speaker. Edit. My ultimate tinfoil hat conclusion of this is that every single thing in the universe is simply electricity, positive and negative atoms on a micro and macro scale, all wiggling back and forth from each other, generating electrical current and making everything happen the way we see it. Story 50. Essential oils when it comes to actual aromatherapy and sanitizing air circulation. Like there's plenty of science behind both and their uses and efficacy, but it's just seen as false or not marketable since it can't be patented. Places that used antiviral essential oil diffusers as part of their COVID regimen saw significantly better results than those that didn't, and it's things that have been known to have antiviral properties for a very long time. Similarly, for essential oils and aromatherapy when it comes to calming anxiety and other neurological issues. There's also plenty of uses for inhalations like with thyme for something fungal in the sinuses or other sinus or nasal issues. But if anyone recommends ingesting essentially oils, they're probably full of shit. Most are very dangerous to ingest. They also shouldn't be used extensively around small children or babies. Story 51. If you have low levels of cerebrospinal fluid, happens sometimes if you have a lumbar puncture that doesn't reseal, you'll get a really bad headache, like ready to throw up bad. If you lay down horizontally, the headache disappears almost instantly. Stand up, it comes back on decently fast. Lay down, it's gone again. The mechanism itself is pretty simple. Proper fluid pressure for your brain. But the change in how you feel is so dramatic that it feels like magic. Story 52, lucid dreaming. Keeping a dream journal and recalling your previous dream a couple times through the day is enough to increase it over a very short amount of time. Funny enough, too much lucid dreaming can reduce the quality of your sleep. Science is still not 100% on dreaming, but the general consensus is that it's your brain shitting out unnecessary information. Story 53, Planet 9. There is a hypothetical extraplanet in the solar system that has a very distant orbit and can't be directly observed because it's so far it doesn't reflect the light of the sun. Its existence is proposed based on its gravitational effects on smaller bodies in the solar system, though it's still debatable. If it really exists and they won't call it Nibiru, I'll be mad. It has such a meme potential. Story 54. I have two things that I usually do, but I can't explain it. But if an expert explains it to me and others, it still boggles my mind. Baking, especially yeast behavior. I can bake bread, mind you, but I don't think I fully comprehend the full explanation of how it works. I just know it works, so I do it. Molting, and the absurd similarities of its behavior as an ailment in people named psoriasis. I have them, but the explanation of its behavior baffles me. I can comprehend theories and principles of computer science, artificial intelligence, and electrical engineering, but I guess that is where my brain draws the line. Story 55, oh my gosh, relevant thread to my situation. I've had sleep paralysis half my life and I'm in my 30s. They used to come in waves, would get a few in a week and then nothing. However, lately, I'm having the most nights. My goodness, if I could describe how they are for me, I'd be in a loony bin. I've learned to tap into them and will lucid dream about a quarter of the times I have paralysis. Story 56, there's no such thing as pseudoscience. Either you follow scientific method or you don't. If you follow scientific method and people still say you are pseudoscientist, it's because they have a bias against your subject matter, and they, in fact, are the pseudoscientists. For instance, archaeologists calling Graham Hancock a pseudoscientist only serve to identify themselves as grifters that refuse to take in scientific evidence that doesn't fit with their dogma. You can disagree all you want with Hancock and some of his interpretations or analysis, which he clearly say is speculation based on opinion, but you cannot deny the facts and data he is bringing to the table. Dating stuff by whomever put their initials on it last is a stupid way to establish when something was built anyway. And why would people leave valuable tools laying around for thousands of years? Those things would have been among the most valuable at the time. Story 57. The full moon turning people crazy. That's where the term lunatic comes from, lunar. I work on psych wards, and without fail, every full moon, the amount of incidents we have increases massively. I've also spoken to police officers who say the same thing. When I book time off work, I actually try and align it with the full moon so I miss the busiest periods. I didn't believe it when I first heard it, thought it was pseudoscience, just a load of woo-woo. But after working on psych wards for 8 years now, it's consistently completely true. Story 58. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy was weirdly effective. Imagine having social anxiety for 10 years then. When you go to get help, they ask you to look side to side and wave a tuning fork around your head. And after a few months, you're cured. I'm simplifying. But studies have been published, so more science than pseudo. Story 59. So this probably has a very iffy position on this list due to a lack of science done on it at all, and I would do that science if I could. But for the past 50, 60 years in Denmark, there's been this thing called body therapy, kropsterapi. It's a form of massage, some exercises, and a bit of talking that helps with your mental health issues. They've borrowed a lot of their vocabulary from TCM, which only makes it sound crazier. The bladder point on your left foot is very sore, which is a symptom of a lot of anger. I swear, though, it has helped me like nothing else. It's gotten more and more steam in the last 10 years as other people experience the same thing.